Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Peace talks stall as pressure mounts on Ukraine over territory, while battlefield realities from drone warfare to air defence shortages continue to shape the conflict. With Western support under scrutiny, the coming weeks could prove crucial for both negotiations and military dynamics. Well, to lay this out for us, we're joined by Mark McNamee. He's co-founder, Ukraine Business News Network. Mark, welcome, and thank you for taking the time.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Okay, before we kick off, there's a short soundbite from President Zelenskyy that I'd like to play, and then I'll get your take on it.
The Americans are ready to finalize these security guarantees at a high level once Ukraine is ready to withdraw from the Donbas. In my view, the Russian side is shaping the atmosphere in its dialogue with the Americans around this very idea, that Ukraine should withdraw from the Donbas. The United States will then provide the security guarantees Ukraine is seeking, and Russians will certainly end this war. More or less, this is the triangle we find ourselves in.
So we're back to the land for peace conversation that's been hanging around since these discussions started. What do you make of what the president just said?
This isn't terribly surprising. I think, firstly, just look at the timing. President Trump's priorities are clearly the war in Iran, which was a war of his own choosing, and his personal prestige and presidential legacy will be on the line for that. And he does not see the war in Ukraine as existential for Western security, which in fact it truly is. So I think what we see here is simply Trump dumping the problem on Ukraine, saying, essentially, here's an ultimatum and take this deal. I'm tired of dealing with this because I have a higher priority elsewhere. So that explains more or less the timing here. President Zelenskyy is very correct in characterizing the situation, where the talks are, accurately, as he has described them. There's a lot to take from this, though. I don't think Trump has the power. It's been over a year. He doesn't have the power to sell out and abandon Ukraine. Ukrainians, first and foremost, are in the way, and Europeans increasingly are also in the way. Secondly, Trump would have major problems related to these security guarantees. First and foremost, would the U.S. actually support genuine bona fide security guarantees? Secondly, would Russia agree to any true, real, genuine security guarantees offered by the United States and the West? And then three, would Ukrainians and also Europeans who would be involved in Ukraine's security, would they believe in these security guarantees? So to be honest, we've made very little progress over the past year plus. We put some things on paper, which I guess is more than where things were under Biden. But giving ultimatums and not working out these critical details, which is what international diplomacy is, and the end to all conflicts involve strict attention to very minute details. And that's not something that the Trump administration has done whatsoever. So throwing out public ultimatums and hoping the dominoes just sort of fall, people agree to them, and then we move on, which is essentially Trump's negotiating strategy currently, is not going to work. And we'll be back to, soon enough, Ukraine and Europe handling this war more or less on its own going forward.
Understood. Well, as you say, the devil is in the detail, and details would include, for example, how President Trump might exert pressure on President Zelenskyy, for example, by withholding weaponry and or intelligence that the US is currently supplying to Ukraine. I mean, Mark Rutte said at the NATO conference that the flow was continuing unabated. Is that at risk, do you think?
It absolutely is at risk. And I think Mark Rutte was intentionally saying that, knowing that Donald Trump's priority is the Middle East, and knowing that it's already been reported that the U.S. has diverted air defense and other equipment to the Middle East away from Ukraine. Mark Rutte was choosing his words very carefully to try to keep Trump at least somewhat on board in supporting Ukraine, and critically in the areas, as you mentioned, the two primary areas being long-range air defense, which is hard for Europe to replace adequately, and the intelligence support, which Europe has improved its ability to replace, but cannot fully replace it, according to what's been disclosed publicly. So that's very important for Ukraine and Europe to try to hold on to, but we should definitely be preparing for, I would say, the potential for the U.S. to withhold military sales, particularly as Trump has become increasingly antagonistic towards Europe in the past week, related to how, as he perceives, the lack of support of NATO for his venture into the Middle East. Chancellor Merz of Germany quoted Trump to him and essentially said, "The war in Iran is not Europe's war," which is what Trump and his team have said to Europe for the past year, that the war in Ukraine is not their war. So these fissures are developing, and they're quite dangerous because Ukraine and Europe could use that support from the United States. It's not as critical as it was, say, 6 months or a year ago, but continued support is quite important going forward. So this becomes naturally problematic for Ukraine here. Really for the coming weeks and months, as it's expected this Iran war is likely to remain a problem, and unresolved, I would say, for at least the next month or so.
Indeed. Now, the other aspect to this triangle that President Zelenskyy refers to is, Russia saying, well, we would agree to peace if we got a slice of the Donbas region. How reliable is that statement from Russia?
If you're still trusting Putin after his 25 years in office to take him at his word, you should check yourself out. So no, this is not in the least bit reliable. This is playing games with Trump, telling Trump what he wants to hear, Trump believing it, and Trump complaining in this past week that Putin is easier to work with than Zelenskyy. Well, if you're willing to believe Putin at his word repeatedly, then of course he's relatively easy to work with. But this is the point. Putin, of course, as we know, has shown zero interest in peace. He has rejected 7 ceasefires over the past year plus now, while Ukraine within 24 hours has essentially accepted all of them. The obstacle to peace here, plain and simple, is Putin. This is the problem. But Trump doesn't see it that way, unfortunately. And so now we're in this continued situation. And as far as Putin, a further problem relates to the security guarantees. What would he actually truly agree to? He's led Trump to believe that he would agree to some sort of security guarantees. But as we mentioned, the details are critical here. Russia has put forward their sense of security guarantees, which includes them, the aggressor and initiator of this war, as one of the signees as a security guarantor in the security guarantees portion of the peace deal, which makes absolutely no sense. Of course, Trump, does he understand that? Do those details matter? Does he have a problem with that? I'm sure if this goes through U.S. Congress, as Ukraine is insisting, and Trump's team has actually agreed to, I'm sure several congressmen and senators would raise this issue as to why Russia is a signee as a security guarantor. They have veto power over security guarantees, the support from security guarantors. So that would, of course, be massively problematic once you dive into the details of this. And these aren't just details. These are core features of a potential future peace deal.
Indeed. Well, Russia has already once before said that they would protect Ukraine when they took the nuclear missiles off Ukrainian territory and back into Russia. But moving on now, there has been a shift in the defense industry, if you like, in the sense of the use of drones. So Ukraine has been very proactive in developing and evolving drone technology, such that they're playing a major role in this war on the battlefield, and many countries are asking for Ukraine's expertise to be shared, and technology, including Europe, of course, and various Middle Eastern countries, to protect against the Iranian Shahed drones that are being fired at them. How does this shift Ukraine's geopolitical heft, if you like, in this conversation when it comes to finding some kind of peaceful solution?
Yeah, it's extremely important. This is frankly one of the few silver linings in the war in Iran, which most of the implications, unfortunately, are negative for Ukraine. We don't need to necessarily go through the list of all those things, but one of the silver linings that is positive is the fact that Ukraine has made itself truly the leader in modern drone and air defense technology, which is in desperate need by these extremely wealthy Gulf states that are willing to pay, of course, top dollar for that. And fortunately, Ukraine is in desperate need of capital to fund greater domestic production of all sorts of defense equipment. So this is really a match made in heaven, potentially, that needs to be seized upon. And also another critical aspect is, again, as we're watching this new burgeoning world order here, and we've heard European nations, the leader of Finland, for example, Stubb, making overtures over the last few months to create a new middle powers alliance of these countries to fuse together that in unison can act as a great power, more or less. So you take a number of European countries, you take a number of Gulf allies, obviously Ukraine, and who might be unified against a common enemy in Russia and Iran. And that then, of course, can form the basis of a stronger polity that then can sort of throw its weight around in the geopolitical sphere more confidently, politically, and with the financial resources of the as a combined entity.
Indeed.
So
Mark,
these are the types of things that we're watching. Yes, please.
In the last few seconds that we have left, just very quickly, President Zelensky's in Saudi. He's just arrived today. Do we know anything about what he's planning on doing there?
We don't know much, but what we do know with absolute certainty is their interest in obtaining Ukraine's defense equipment and critically having bilateral negotiations with the Ukrainian government as opposed to with private Ukrainian companies. The point being, Ukraine is trying to extract some political and financial concessions for the country at large, and not just on a private entity basis, because Ukraine in particular needs the long-range ballistic missile air defense support. And so that's what they're really shooting for in this deal with the Saudis.
Understood. Mark McNamee, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good evening.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.